Well, thank you for coming tonight to the Traverse Area District Library Zoom programming. We have all of our programs. You can find them at TADL.org/events. And also, most of our programs are recorded, so you can catch them again on our YouTube channel, which is TADL Not Just Books. Tonight, we're here again with Alana from AmeriCorps. Well, she's actually a member of AmeriCorps, and she's volunteering for the American Red Cross. And she's going to talk to us tonight and continue our series on National Preparedness Month, or Disaster Preparedness Month of September. And tonight she'll be talking about floods and how to prepare in the event of a flood. Welcome, Alana.
Yeah, thanks for introducing me, Betsy. I'll just start by sharing my screen. All right, everything looks good. So welcome everyone to this Be Red Cross Ready presentation. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thanks to the library for hosting us, but all month long for, as she was saying, National Preparedness Month. And like she said, my name is Alana, and I just want to bring up before we begin that there is a few questions connected to this presentation. I have to ask that you fill those out for my AmeriCorps program. I believe they're linked in the email that you received when you signed up for the presentation. It really helps our program track the learning that goes on with these presentations. So you have to fill it out not once, but twice. Once before the presentation and then once after the presentation. I know that's a lot to ask, but that would really help me out and our program out. So if you could please fill out those questionnaires, I would be so grateful. And as we were saying earlier, today we'll be discussing floods and how to prepare for and respond to them. But first, I'll just be covering disasters in general and the 3 basic steps that the Red Cross recommends as far as preparing for them. Those are called our disaster essentials. So let's begin. So odds are that disaster will strike. The simple fact is that disasters happen. They happen often with little or no warning, anywhere and at any time. They can affect any community, and it's a disaster if normal response systems are overwhelmed, people get hurt, and or property is damaged or destroyed. Every year, the communities across the United States face multiple disasters, including our own community here in Northern Michigan. So what type of disasters do we specifically face here, though? Not all of these disasters on the slide apply to Michigan or even Northern Michigan, but you might want to take them into account if you spend a significant amount of your time in another state or in another location. But here in Northern Michigan, we face these disasters: home fires, thunderstorms, tornadoes, wildfires, winter storms, extreme heat, and of course floods, which we're talking about today. And it's good just to be prepared for all of these disasters since they all occur in Northern Michigan, not just floods, which we're talking about. All right, in all of those disasters that I just mentioned, a lot of people assume that someone else will be there to help them, but the fact of the matter is resources just aren't there to support everyone immediately in the event of a disaster. First responders, disaster organizations like the Red Cross, government organizations, and hospital emergency rooms are doing their best, but on average, these groups are staffed and prepared for normal day-to-day operations, and that makes resources limited during a disaster. So the truth is, we have to depend on ourselves first, because not only all those things I just mentioned, but roads can even be impassable, utilities might be shut off or unavailable, and banks, grocery stores, gas stations, pharmacies, schools, workplaces can be closed for days on end, which I think we've all experienced quite recently. So it's up to you to be ready. Don't count on receiving any help right away. be prepared to help yourself and even your neighbors, older adults that you interact with, and everyone else in your household. And doing this preparing in advance helps people stay safe, adapt to challenges much better, and recover much more quickly if there is a disaster. So the Red Cross has the easy steps. All you have to do is get a kit. This kit will contain all the supplies you need if you have to evacuate during a disaster, which is definitely something that can happen in the event of flooding. Step 2 is plan. You want to identify the steps you need to take to respond to specific disasters. Those are going to be looking a little different, you know, a home fire versus a flood versus any other disaster. And step 3 is to be informed. So you want to learn how you'll get information if a disaster occurs and what resources are available in our community. So let's talk a little bit more in depth about each of these. So our first step was to get a kit. We recommend you make 2 different types of kits. The first one is a household kit, which will have supplies for 3 days or so, but 2 weeks is even better amount to have. And then a go bag, which is a smaller mobile version, maybe in a backpack, duffel bag version of that same household kit, supplies for about 3 days, not too heavy. In case you need to evacuate quickly, you can just grab it and go. Also consider making one for your vehicle as well, or even leaving your go bag in your vehicle, because often when we're evacuating in our vehicle, or we're in our vehicle and disaster strikes. So always a good idea to have a kit in there, and you can even customize it for specific, you know, vehicle related problems that you might run into. You know, people put kitty litter in the car if they're stuck in the winter, for example, things like that. So what is inside of these kits? You want to have essential supplies for each member of the household, and you want to make sure you're keeping it fresh. You should be refreshing supplies about every 6 months, so you're not using anything that's like expired, for example. And this might sound kind of, you know, well, what is essential supplies for each member of my household? But you just want to think about what do you use on a daily basis and what you would do if those resources were limited or not available. Those are the types of things that you want to put in your kit. So you can see some examples on the slide here. We have some non-perishable food, water, there's flashlights, a first aid kit, a radio, just like very basic supplies that you can, and you can go from there and customize it to things that are specific to you or anyone else in your house. And your pets, you can put supplies in there for them as well. And then you can also customize it for those disasters that we mentioned earlier that happen in northern Michigan. And just to note on water, which is very important in concerns to flooding, we'll talk more about water, especially later. We recommend you have at least 1 gallon of water per person per day in your emergency kit. So half of that water will be used for drinking, and the other half will be used for sanitation, because in the event of a flood or other disasters, your utilities could be shut off for days or weeks at a time, and water could be also contaminated. So that's why water is so especially important. And a lot of times, you know, you already have a lot of these supplies already in your house. You know, things like non-perishable food, the water bottles, the flashlight, the first aid kit. You just have to gather it all together and, you know, actually assemble it into a kit. So you don't have to go out and spend a lot of money. Here are some other kit recommendations that we have. I know this is a big list. Don't feel overwhelmed. Like I said, just 6, and then go from there. Preparedness is a process and it takes a little bit of time. And these are just general recommendations. You have to put everything inside of your kit that's on this list, and there's things that aren't on this list that are also great options. But on this list, we have extra batteries for phones, flashlights, or any power-dependent mobility device, oxygen and other assistive technology needs you might have, or anyone else in your household, 7-day supply of medications or medical items, sanitation and personal hygiene items, copies of personal documents like medical information, proof of address, deed lease to your home, passports, birth certificates, insurance policies, current photos of loved ones. That's just in case you get separated. You can show people that picture and be, reunited possibly quicker than you would without that picture. Cell phone charger and battery, really important. Household member and emergency contact information, extra cash if you feel comfortable with that, an emergency blanket, and maps of the area, especially if you depend on your phone for directions or maps. You might want to have a physical map just in case your phone does die. And then, like I said earlier, you can customize this kit to fit your personal needs. And you can also create a special kit for kids if you have kids in your household. You can even make it with them, which makes them feel, a little bit more empowered, more comfortable with the ideas of a scary disaster. And it's a great learning experience. And you can make a separate kit for your pets or your service animals as well. Include things like, their food, some water for them, their identification tags, and any other necessary supplies like a carrier or a leash, things like that. So moving on to our second step here, which was make a plan. And keep in mind that different hazards, different disasters require you to take different actions, but I would say everything on our slide tonight definitely applies to floods. So you want to make sure you know how to evacuate your house, where you're going to meet, any friends, family members, other people in your household. You want to make sure you know where you're going to meet them. If you're separated, you want to know how to communicate with them, and also how you're going to communicate, with authorities or get information. You want to prep your important records for those specific disasters in your area. And you want to know where you'll stay if you do have to evacuate. Maybe someone in the area would be willing to take you in, but always good to check beforehand instead of just showing up on their doorstep. And you want to be prepared if you have to shelter in place, which does happen sometimes in the event of flooding or other disasters. And also make sure you consider household members with access or functional needs, pets, and service animals. If you are a person with access or functional needs, you might need to prepare a little bit differently, but it's definitely still possible, definitely doable. All you have to do is create a personal support network that can help you plan and provide assistance if a disaster happens, and try not to depend on just one person. Include a minimum of 3 people in this network. Then complete a personal assessment of functional abilities and possible needs during and after a disaster situation, and make sure you update and practice this plan and these lists regularly so that it applies at all times, because we never know when a disaster is going to occur. And always plan ahead as to what you will do with your pets too. Maybe you can train them in some way so that they're more comfortable. Most Red Cross shelters can't accept pets just because of health and safety concerns. So get an idea of where you would take your pet or what you would do with them in the event of a disaster. You can contact your local emergency management agency for a list of pet-friendly shelters. Have that in mind. And finally, make sure you're reviewing this plan that you make with everyone in your household. Don't just keep it to yourself. Make sure everyone's aware of it. And even if you have somebody in your house that travels on a regular basis, plan, if they're there, what you'll do, and if they're not there, what you'll do as well. Our third step was to be informed. And by attending this presentation, you're already on the road to being a little bit more informed, so you can pat yourself on the back for that, but there's much more you can do. You'll want to know how your community warns of different coming disasters, maybe outdoor sirens, maybe smartphone alerts that you might want to sign up for. Just make sure you're aware what different warnings come for what different disasters. We at the Red Cross specifically recommend that you have a NOAA battery-powered weather radio so that if your phone doesn't work, if the TV doesn't work, you still have a radio that you can listen to for updated information about the weather, even if, utilities or power is out for a long period of time. Also be familiar with different weather alerts, such as a watch versus a warning, prepare versus active, and we'll talk more about that as it specifically applies to flooding. And along those same lines, follow instructions from authorities. For example, if they tell you not to drive down a certain road because it is flooded, make sure you listen to what the authorities say, because that can be really dangerous. That's just one example, but always good to follow those instructions so you stay as safe as possible. We also recommend that you know your neighbors, because they can be good resources of community information or even help. Maybe you're trying to evacuate, but you usually use public transport. Maybe someone can help you out in a situation like that. We also recommend you always know about an area before you travel there. Just like I was talking about earlier, make sure if you're vacationing somewhere or staying with friends or family in another place, you know what kind of disasters you could potentially face. And you can even, think about what season you're in and what type of disasters that would possibly occur in that area. And then finally, we have down at the bottom, emergency contact cards, which can be very helpful if your cell phone is not functioning or if you have no power, so you can't access those numbers in your phone. Nowadays, we don't really memorize anymore, so writing them down on a emergency contact card can be really helpful, and you can put that in your emergency kit or post it on your refrigerator, or anywhere that would be helpful for you. Maybe keep it in your wallet, something like that. The Red Cross does have a printable emergency card that you can print out if you are interested in that. As far as what numbers to put on this emergency contact card, we specifically recommend that you include someone who lives outside of your town or maybe even outside of your state, because in regional emergencies, it can be difficult to make landline or mobile phone calls to others that are in the area, but maybe you can reach someone outside of the area. And that way they can communicate with everyone else in your household and tell you that, you're safe and sound. And one last thing is, I'll plug our own Red Cross emergency app here. It can send you weather and other emergency alerts, just like we were talking about earlier. And it also has a make a plan feature where you can create your own household emergency plan, and it's totally free. So you don't have to spending any money, and trying to become more informed, more prepared. Right, now we will discuss more specifics when it comes to preparing for, responding to, and recovering from floods. Before, we were just talking about more general information. This is more specific to flooding. So floods are actually the most frequent natural disaster in the United States. If you were at our home fire presentation that I did at the beginning of the month, you might be thinking, no, she said home fires are the most frequent disaster in the United States, which is true, but we don't generally consider home fires a natural disaster. So floods are the most frequent natural disaster that happens in the United States, and they can happen anywhere, and they're dangerous to people, animals, and property. But how does flooding happen? Various situations can trigger flooding, including heavy rains and storm surge, rapidly melting snow, which we definitely have in the northern Michigan area, and dams can fail, and other structures built to contain or control large volumes of water can get overwhelmed. Remember, I was talking about earlier how hospitals and other organizations are only staffed for normal operations. These structures that we build for water are often pretty much the same way. They're built for regular operation. So when we have a very intense storm surge or lots of snow melting, they can get overwhelmed and flooding can occur. Also here in Michigan, we have to consider our proximity to lakes and other bodies of water. Over the past 5 years, the region has seen massive amounts of rainfall, more than usual. And just in the past 10 years, the Great Lakes have experienced record-breaking highs and lows. This fluctuation has resulted in dangerous erosion and flooding, which has washed away houses, destroyed roads, and is even threatening critical infrastructure like water treatment plants in some areas. So you want to consider that as well. Now I have a video from a very recent flooding that happened in Midland that our Northern Michigan Red Cross responded to. This flood was caused by intense rain and also a dam failure. And in the video, we'll see pretty much all stages of this flood, including during the flood, after the flood, and even recovery efforts. So it's a pretty good representation of it. And not too far from here.
There it goes. The Eatonville Dam in Midland County, Michigan, collapsed on May 19th after several days of steady rainfall that caused overwhelming flooding. The rushing water destroyed roads and bridges and wiped homes off their foundations as it traveled down the Tittabawassee River toward downtown Midland.
It's amazing what the power of Mother Nature can do. Just watching and sitting in my own yard and watching trees crumble, my boat take off from being tied up and float freely down the lake. And now to come up here and witness what it's done to others' homes.
10,000 people were forced to evacuate in Eatonville, Sanford, and Midland. The dam held back Wixom Lake, which nearly vanished after the collapse. Lakefront homes were left to the cactus flood. It's all just gone, just plain gone. And will it ever come back? In Sanford, another dam was overtopped.
It's a whole town destroyed by this, not just one or two. All of my fellow business owners in this town, plus family residents all through here, have been wiped out.
Connie Methner's salon in Sanford had already been closed for 2 months due to the coronavirus pandemic. Now the building is a total loss.
And I never, ever dreamed this could actually happen if the water hit to the ceilings. And we're gonna have to tear it all down. There's no saving this place.
Pat Perry lost her Sanford home of 31 years.
So they moved everything upstairs thinking everything was gonna be safe, and I don't think they expected the whole house to go. So I know their roof is over in that corner back there, and then apparently the rest of their house is that way.
Dow Chemical, which has its headquarters in Midland, shut down operations. There are concerns that floodwaters commingling with Dow Chemical containment ponds threaten water quality. Dow says there's no threat to the environment or residents. Governor Gretchen Whitmer took an aerial tour of the region the day after the dam collapse.
This is unlike anything we've seen before. The damage is truly devastating to see how high the water levels are, to see roofs barely visible in parts of Midland, and to see a lake that's been drained in another part. It's truly remarkable how much damage we have sustained. But I think the most remarkable thing that I saw yesterday was people that were stepping up to help one another and take care of one another.
The same day Donald Trump visited Michigan to tour a Ford plant making ventilators, he approved the governor's request for an emergency disaster declaration for the flooded region. The failure of the Eatonville Dam was not the first sign of trouble for the structure. 2 years ago, federal regulators pulled the operator's license to generate power over concerns about the dam's ability to handle flooding. But the dam's owner said it was pressured by the state to maintain elevated water levels on Whitson Lake, despite structural concerns.
All right. Here's also some before and after pictures of the flooding from that video. It's obviously a pretty extreme example of, what can happen when there's flooding in the area. But they had no idea, they never thought that would happen, which is what everyone says. So ways that you can prepare for flooding. One of the most important is knowing what different flood alerts mean. Floodwaters rise very rapidly, so your safety depends on understanding and staying informed about the conditions and acting as quickly as possible when needed. So weather forecasters use the terms flood watch, flood warning, and flash flood warning to describe flooding. Watch means a flood is possible. You'll want to stay tuned for updates, make sure you keep listening to the news, keep your phone on you to get those alerts, and just be prepared to act. A flood warning means flooding is already happening or it will happen very soon. And that's when you should take immediate precautions and get to higher ground if necessary. And a flash flood warning is the same thing. It means a flash flood is imminent or already occurring, and you should take immediate precautions and get to that higher ground. Flash floods are often just a much faster and usually more connected to streams and rivers overflowing versus just a regular flood warning, which could be still in those areas, but maybe a little slower and in other areas as well. So risks that are associated with floods, obviously the first one you think of is drowning, which is absolutely correct. Floodwaters can be extremely powerful, and each year in the United States, floods kill about 93 people and cause billions of dollars worth of damage. Just 6 inches of fast-moving water can knock down an adult, and 12 inches can sweep away most cars. So you want to be extremely careful when it comes to fast-moving floodwaters. But aside from those immediate dangers, flooding can leave behind additional risks, including covering the area with mud, silt, and sharp or heavy debris. It can also trigger landslides, water sources, and the flooded areas can be contaminated with hazardous materials such as fuel, untreated sewage, pesticides, and dangerous building materials. We definitely saw that in the video. Drinking water, sanitation, and electricity can be unavailable for days or weeks at a time, which is why we have that water in our emergency kit. And floods can also leave behind mold, which can continue to cause damage and make people sick long after the flood has actually ended. Mold can actually start to grow on a damp surface within 24 to 48 hours. And it'll just continue to grow until steps are taken to eliminate the source of the moisture and effectively deal with the mold that is already there. So as far as what you can do to modify your 3 steps that we talked about earlier for specifically floods, in your emergency kit, you can add things like rain gear. Make sure you have that weather radio. You can add sleeping bags if they're not too large for evacuation. Make sure you have that water that we discussed. Flashlights also are a great thing to put in there for when you come back to your home. And also masks and gloves for when you come back to your home to protect you against that mold and also anything else that could be in your home when you're trying to clean it up after the flood has occurred. So you could add those to your emergency kit so you always have them. And before a flood, it's a good idea to place any important documents like insurance policies, valuables in waterproof containers so you can keep them dry and easily accessible. You can add that to your kit or you can leave it at home. That's up to you, but you might want to consider adding it to your kit in some type of fire and water resistance or deposit box. You can save electronic copies or pictures of the documents, and you can have that, on a flash drive or something that you bring with you as well. Oftentimes, you will need these documents assistance from organizations like FEMA or other similar organizations. Even the Red Cross requires you to validate, that you are who you say you are and that you lived in the home that was affected by the disaster. So it's always good to have copies or be prepared to have those documents because you might need them later in order to get that assistance. As far as plan specifically for floods, you want to definitely be aware of your community's evacuation plan and evacuation routes. You can check with your or Office of Emergency Management to find evacuation routes and see which ones apply to you, your family, or anywhere else that you are regularly, maybe your workplace. If you don't have your own form of transportation, you definitely want to come up with a plan for how you will get to a safe place in the event of evacuation. Where you're going to stay if you do have to evacuate. You want to have a place prepared as out of the immediate area. And again, make sure that person, whoever you're staying with, or if it's somebody you know, knows ahead of time before you just show up there. And know what organizations operate emergency shelters near you. So the Red Cross is one organization that operates emergency shelters, but other organizations do too. Governmental organizations and even local churches and places like that operate emergency shelters. So always good to know, what organizations you will want to look out for if that were to occur. And then as far as being informed for flooding risks, we talked about understanding those alerts, which is very important. But I would recommend signing up in advance to receive emergency notifications from your local emergency services. So that those alerts are sent directly to your phone, so you don't have to watch TV or get them in any other way. And make sure not only you, but everyone else in your household understands those weather alerts too, so that they know when flooding is very serious and they should get out of there. Additionally, you can also stay updated on water conditions with the U.S. meteorological surveys, Water Now, and Water Alert services, which will send you text messages about current water levels nearby you. And they'll also send you water quality alerts too, which was pretty interesting, I thought. So what to do when there is a flood predicted or a flood coming near you. It's absolutely vital that you prepare to evacuate, prepare to get to higher ground. You can check on your disaster kits to make sure they have all of those supplies and you're ready to go with your, disaster backpack or duffel bag or whatever it is you've packed your kit into. Make sure you secure those important documents, and then just keep monitoring the local news. Watch for those alerts, and to see what happens. And don't forget also to bring any animals you have indoors so that they are safe as well in the event of any type of disaster. It's probably usually raining if a flood is predicted, so you might want to bring them inside. And then you can even go further if you have more time to prepare. You can fill extra plastic water bottles with clean drinking water. You can also fill your bathtub and sinks up with water, and then you can use this later if you end up sheltering in place for flushing the toilet or washing your clothing if your utilities get shut off. Also, make sure your vehicle's gas tank is full in case you do need to evacuate. That would be very unlucky if you went to evacuate and your car was on E and everyone else is also evacuating at the same time. You can also unplug propane tanks and turn off propane tanks and unplug small appliances. And if you have even more time before a potential flood, you can move furniture and valuables to higher floors inside your home. We saw this mentioned in that video. This may or may not protect them because obviously the flooding is going to start on those lower floors. If you end up in a big flood like they had in Midland, obviously it's not going to end up doing too much good, but it could possibly protect them if the flooding doesn't get too bad. And sometimes during floods, you might be asked to turn off your utilities by authorities, in which case you can do so. During the flood, like I said, your first priority should be to get to higher ground. Definitely stay away from any places that are lower, like valleys or underpasses, any place that can become quickly flooded. If you're next to a body of water, please get out of there. It can be tempting to take a very cool video, but just get out of there. You also want to not walk through any flood water because, like I said, just 6 inches of fast moving water can knock you over and sweep you away. And also for that same reason, don't drive through flooded areas. Here at the Red Cross, we say turn around, don't drown. So that's something you can remember if you're ever conflicted about driving through these flooded areas. Just turn around. It's pretty much impossible to determine exactly how deep the water is in an area experiencing heavy rains or a flood, and it only takes 12 inches of fast flowing water to sweep away your car. And not to mention, the road underneath could already be damaged by the flood. It could have been swept away or just have, something in the way that the flood swept in that's going to block your car anyway, or even get you stuck in that low part of the road. So better to just turn around and not drive through flooded areas. If you do happen to be caught in a vehicle on a flooded roadway and the water is rapidly rising, you want to get out of that vehicle as quickly as you can and move to higher ground on foot. It's better to do that than just in general, avoid touching floodwater as much as possible because floodwater can be contaminated with sewage, chemicals, and contain insects or even dangerous animals as well. So you'll want to just touching it all together. So we had recent flooding in New York, and this guy went viral. He's like floating in his tube, just hanging out in the floodwater. You know, don't do that. Don't be that guy. Just stay out of the floodwater because it can be pretty gross and just sanitary. About after a flood has occurred. Well, if you were told to evacuate and you evacuated, only return home once local authorities has told you that it's safe to do so. It can still be dangerous. Avoid and report any downed or loose power lines or damaged power equipment, and continue to avoid those flooded roads. Please don't drive through the flooded roads. Also, stay out of any building that has water around it because it could still be dangerous. If you stayed inside your home or you're returning to your home after a flood, don't walk across any sagging or damaged looking flooring because it could potentially collapse. Avoid pushing or leaning against walls and furniture that have been damaged. Again, for that same reason, they could completely collapse and it wouldn't be safe. Watch out for animals or even bugs that have entered your home. Possibly they're trying to take refuge there and you just want to be careful. Or they've passed away in your home and you want to be careful of that as well. If weather is dry, you can open the windows and doors for that fresh air to come in and help dry your home out. But also be careful about the mold that we mentioned earlier, which is particularly harmful for young children under the age of 12, anyone with asthma, allergies, other breathing conditions, people with weakened immune systems. You want to take it very seriously and be careful around mold. And we all have masks nowadays, so maybe pop that mask in your house and you notice that there's mold, which if you experienced flooding, there probably is, even if you can't see it, unfortunately. If you're uncertain of the quality of your water in your home, the plumbing, just use bottled water. Always better to be on the safe side. And same thing with any food that you had in your home, in your refrigerator or in the cupboards. If you're in doubt about it, just throw it out. And that goes, in general for if your power goes out for a long period of time as well. When in doubt, just throw it out. Better to be safe than sorry, as far as that goes. And as far as other members of your household, don't forget about your pets too. They're probably under an extreme amount of stress. Well, we are too, but so are they when it comes to disasters. So just keep a close eye on them. And if you encounter anyone else's abandoned or lost pets, just be careful. It can be tempting if you're an animal lover to, try and take them in and take care of them, but just be careful because again, they're under extreme amounts of stress during a disaster like a flood. So as far as recovering and getting back as possible to normal when you've returned home after a disaster such as a flood, you'll want to make sure you wear that protective gear like that mask that I was talking about, but also some gloves, boots, eye protection, and even a hard hat if you have one, just so you can stay as safe as possible when you're cleaning out your home or making your way through the town after the flood. If conditions are safe and you're using that protective gear, you can make temporary repairs to cover holes, brace walls, and remove debris. If the power's out, use a flashlight. Don't use an open flame because possibly there could be natural gas or propane gas, which if you smell natural gas or propane or hear a hissing noise, you want to leave immediately and get far away to a safe location. You can call the fire department and or the gas company once you're in that safe location, and they will take care of that. And finally, take pictures of any damage, save all receipts associated with the cleanup and repairs because you might need them for insurance purposes. Recovering from a disaster can be a long process. I help people out with that through the Red Cross, so I know how hard and long it can be. The American Red Cross has some resources available to you, so you can go to the Disaster Relief and Recovery Services website that we have for help. And the emergency app that I mentioned earlier also has information about specifically relating to floods, how to assess your situation, clean up, make repairs, make repairs, and get access to resources that can help you. And you can also call the Red Cross for assistance with recovery, and we will help you. As far as preparing your home in advance, though, so maybe the recovery is not as hard as it could be, there's a few things that you can do. So you'll want to assess whether your home or even your business, if you have a business as well, is at risk for flooding. I know a lot of people are thinking, well, I don't think I'm ever going to experience flooding. That's what everyone thinks. But here's some questions to try and help you out. So think about, are you in a floodplain? Do you even know? Do you live near a lake, a river, or a stream? Do you live near a dam that could get overwhelmed potentially, like in that video in Midland? How much rain and snowmelt typically happens in your area? You know, is it a lot? Could flooding occur there? Do you have a basement? That's typically where we see a lot of flood damage. And even if you don't use your basement, it's unfinished, you often have, you know, important utility equipment down there. And finally, talking about the infrastructure of the area. Are you sure that the infrastructure is, you know, good enough to protect you in the event of all those other things occurring? Sometimes we just don't know. So it's always better to protect in advance just in case something happens. So some things that you can do are install check valves in plumbing to prevent floodwater from backing up into the drains of your home, and sealing walls in your basement and waterproofing compounds to avoid seepage through the cracks. And also consider buying flood insurance, as homeowners insurance doesn't typically cover flood damage. So just something to consider. I deal with a lot of clients through the Red Cross who don't have insurance coverage, which makes that recovery part of, you know, very difficult. It's difficult without that support from your insurance company. So if you're interested in flood insurance, you can go to floodsmart.gov, which has a lot of good info about flood insurance specifically. That is the end of me talking about flooding. Here is our National Red Cross phone number that I mentioned earlier that you can call for recovery assistance or, you know, assistance after you've experienced a disaster. It could be flooding, it could be a home fire, or maybe you just know somebody who has experienced a disaster. You want the Red Cross to go check on them. You can call this number. You'll talk to a real human being and answer a few questions. And then that information will be pushed to the local Red Cross in your area, and people like me will get that information and respond to the call. So just something that not everyone is aware of, so I like to mention it in all these presentations I've been doing this month. The last slide, I just want to invite you to join us for our last presentation, which will be on the 30th about winter storms. We'll learn how to prepare for those and how to react if they occur and, you know, recover as well. And then in October, it won't be National Preparedness Month anymore. Obviously, it'll be October, but we'll be doing our hands-only CPR program virtually. So it'll be very simple, very easy to learn, but very important as well. And hopefully we'll also be doing our kids' fire safety program, which is called Prepare with Pedro. We were going to do it today actually, but the weather just didn't cooperate. So hopefully sometime in October, so keep an eye out for it. And then one last thing I have to say is if you're interested in volunteering with our local Red Cross here, I have the email of our volunteer services representative. You can send her an email, tell her that you're interested, and she can explain all that volunteers do with the American Red Cross here. We are almost close to 100% of a volunteer-run organization, so there is plenty of things to do, all kinds of things to do. So if you're interested, please reach out. Other than that, thank you everyone for coming. I don't know if there's any questions or comments in the chat, Betsy. That's pretty much all I have to say.
I don't see any, but thank you so much. It was very, very informative. And the kits that are made for each disaster, it's kind of nice that there is definitely basic stuff, and then you can kind of throw in there what you know, if you look at the weather, you can be like, oh, flood's coming, I better put in, you know, this or whatever, something specific for that. But there is a lot of stuff that have just basic things that work in every kit. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah, even if you just assemble those basic things like the first aid kit, the water, you know, those very, very like bare bones type of kit, you'll still be more prepared than pretty much most people because a lot of people don't have an emergency kit at all. So
right. There we go. Yeah, so I appreciate that and all the slides. It helps a lot when you're in. I'm thankful that we're recording this so I can go back through and take better notes at the same time. Does anyone have any questions at all? There's the chat feature that you can utilize. I don't see anything. So I want to say thank you all for coming. And if you need to take notes or see more of the slides, or if you came in late, just catch us in the next day or two at TADL Not Just Books on our YouTube channel, and we'll have everything up there. So thank you, Alana, again, and we'll see your coworker, Forrest, next week for winter storms.
yes, yeah, that'll be a very relevant one for North Michigan.
Right, exactly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.